It happens. We're real people.
Yep.
Okay. I don't know if I can do that voice again, though. Let's see. It should be slower, shouldn't it?
No, that was good.
All right.
Mr. Sweeney, go.
What'd you call me?
I remember. Old Joe. Never mind.
What's the show?
It was like, what was the one with, bum, 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 Green Acres.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was Mr. Sweeney. That was the Mr. Sweeney voice.
I didn't know that.
Oh, sorry.
I remember Zsa Zsa Gabor was on that show.
Everybody does.
Yes. Well, I don't know what you mean by that, Joe, but I'm pressing more toward wanting to restart. Here we go. So it's like I said, Pastor. I did everything right, and my son is still backslidden. I read that Proverbs 22, and it says, train up a child in the way he should go, and he will not depart from it. Now, how do you explain that?
Well, just tell me again how you know he's backslidden.
Oh, Pastor, it's like I told you already. He ain't been to church with us in almost 6 months.
Oh, so he stopped going to church? Well, that is a problem.
I didn't say he ain't going to church. He just ain't going to the same kind of church. It's some city church like 9th, 10th, Presbyterian, something like that. I tell you, I don't even think it's Baptist. And then there's his Bible.
Oh, he stopped reading his Bible?
No, he's always sitting around reading the thing. That's the problem. Pastor, he's not even using the authorized version. That Bible's got an ESV where the KJV's supposed to be.
Well, I'm not sure he sounds backslidden.
Pastor, I tell you, that boy came home last night wearing skinny jeans and a flannel. Now, you're always teaching you reap what you sow. I've done the reaping. How come I ain't sowing?
A theology of glory versus a theology of the cross with Brad Gray on this episode of Rural Pastors Talk.
Thank you for joining us for another edition of Rural Pastors Talk, a podcast highlighting the advancement of Christ's kingdom in rural places, just like the town you live in. The rural church is not the baby pool we splash around in before moving on to bigger opportunities. It's not the place we're confined until we can take off those training wheels. And it is not God's penalty box as a punishment for breaking the rules. No, Jesus died for his people. And as long as Christ's people live in rural places, a vibrant, healthy, multiplying presence of his church will be there too. Hey, thanks for joining us. My name is TJ Freeman. I am the lead pastor of Wellsboro Bible Church in drippy, rainy, gray, but still warmer than all winter, Wellsboro, Pennsylvania. And I am joined by...
Hey, everybody, I am Joe. I am the MAD here at Wellsboro Bible Church, and that stands for Membership, Care, Assimilation, and Discipleship.
And Mad Skills.
What's going on, guys? Joshua McLaren, pastoral assistant here at Wellsboro Bible Church.
You're back to saying what's going on, guys.
Yep.
You're over it?
Yep.
Oh, that's good. And shouting from the side we have...
Yes, we have Trevor Rout, pastoral intern of counseling and discipleship.
Nice. Joe, did you notice he had to close his eyes to say
Yes,
that?
he did.
Very good. Kindred spirits. On this episode of Rural Pastors Talk, what we shave with. Pastor Brad Gray challenges our view of the cross in rural ministry. Brad reviews something. And a quote from Martin Luther to encourage you, sir. So, Joe.
Yeah.
We all know that you have follicle challenges.
Yes.
Follicular.
That's a good word.
Yeah.
Follicular. I'm going to look that up, see if it actually is a word. If not,
It is
you made
now.
it up.
And therefore you shave
Occasionally.
rather than smiting the barbarism of the razor, as Martin Luther would have instructed you to do, or Charles Spurgeon would have instructed you to do. Josh,
Yes.
you've confessed to be of similar ilk.
Yes. And by the way, follicular is not something you want to look up
Oh,
when it comes to
Thank
has
you for
nothing to
sparing
do
us.
with men. So
Thank
anyway,
you for sparing us.
yes, yeah.
We're starting off on a real good
I
foot
know.
today.
Just need to go back to bed and get up. Trevor, you are well bearded.
Yes, you're very well bearded.
Often the best beard in the room. Yeah, which I don't know. You have some
Nah.
competition today, but yeah, you
His is better.
do have a few millimeters on him. And Brad also then being bearded, although you have hair that complements the beard very well. Trevor's wearing a hat, so it's hard to tell. What do you guys shave with when you shave?
Well, Joe can tell you that I bought a pack of it was a Gillette razor and like a 15 refill razor blade with a couple cans of shaving cream.
How long has that lasted you,
Before
Josh?
I went to college, and I'm on like replacement number 4
My
out of
man.
15.
Wow.
So that shows you.
Wow.
You stole my thunder.
That's,
He stole his
I have
punchline.
plenty,
That
plenty,
was my punchline.
plenty to shave.
I am
with.
amazed by that. That's,
I can probably that single 3-bladed razor I can probably use for months.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
No
I
issues.
shave like 2, maybe
Wow.
3 times a week.
okay.
That's it.
Yeah, that's impressive. Brad, what do you shave with?
I've been a proud Dollar Shave Club member
Ooh,
for
alright.
like 7 years.
Very good. I've always wanted to try it. I've never ventured in.
It's not Dollar Shave Club anymore, so I don't know how they're getting around, that name, but
Mm.
because it's more expensive than $1.
You said 7
yeah.
years.
Yeah,
Nice.
I think 7 years.
You-
It's been a long time.
Started with them in their infancy, then maybe.
Yeah, I started when they were closer to $1. You know how like the dollar
Right.
stores like $1.25 now?
Mhm.
It's sort of like that. Like I pay for like the higher grade blades,
Okay.
so it's like $6.99 a month or
Oh.
something. And you don't have to get it every month, but essentially you get fresh blades at your door.
Yeah, that's great.
It's pretty nice.
Yeah.
And the shave butter,
Ooh.
no shaving cream.
Yeah, shaving cream is overrated.
Yeah, totally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, that's how you cut yourself.
Yeah.
Trevor, what do you shave with?
I usually use I use electric. I use the Philips.
Trevor, you have to speak nice and loud for
Okay.
for
Okay,
our
listen.
friends.
Usually, I use the Philips Norelco 1 blade, so it's an electric one. It works really well.
Electric?
Are you guys
Ooh.
talking about your legs or what?
Yeah, but
No, not usually. I didn't expect you to be an electric razor guy.
since I've grown a beard, I haven't used.
Aren't
Like,
hipsters supposed to be
unless I'm
using
shaving
like
all the way
blades
down,
of
I
some
haven't
kind?
used it.
Right. Yeah, I did expect you to say that you
Straight
have a
razors.
straight razor.
Yeah, that's what I was expecting. I was just assuming though.
Yeah. I feel like that's something, Josh, you would invest in. A straight razor.
Well, yeah, because it would stay sharp for a decade, and I wouldn't have that.
Right.
It wouldn't matter.
Yeah. Well, thanks for asking, guys. I shave with the Gillette Mach 5.
Oh, you went with a 5.
I did. I got hooked. I don't know if they still do it, but it used to be that when you turn 18, Gillette would send you a razor every 18-year-old with like a 3-pack of the blades. Did you guys, anybody else get that?
No.
Nope.
So that was probably a narrow window that I happened to
Yeah.
live within.
How did they know you were 18?
Oh, they know everything.
Like,
They harvest
Part of the
big
draft.
when
data.
you go to sign
Yeah,
up for
that's
selective
exactly what it
service.
was. That's
Yeah.
exactly what it was. So I got it in the mail. I started using it. I really liked it. I tried to switch back to a cheaper razor after I realized how expensive the Gillette stuff is. Those blades, they cost like as
They're
much as
so
tires for my
expensive.
car. Yeah. And so I tried to switch back, but it's too late. They got me.
Doesn't Gillette though have like a Dollar Shave Club like copycat?
I'm not sure.
You were telling me about
I'm pretty
that.
sure they do.
Didn't you?
Yeah.
Didn't you say people at the Daily Wire or something? That's different. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I
never
was
mind.
going to look that up too because that's
Yeah.
pretty.
That was
I'm pretty sure
hair
they do.
razor. So
Okay.
it's beard care, not necessarily shaving. Oh,
I didn't know about that, but to continue
Sorry.
for the sake of getting out of this.
I was just going to
Little
say
segment.
the little
Yeah.
headline says short.
Yes.
Question.
Anyway, I wanted to finish my story about myself because it's my favorite topic. I upgraded over time to the Mach 5, which I've stuck with, but I just wanted to share a trick. So I do shave more often because I would have the neck beard that would be
Mm.
like I'd look like a turkey walking around. So you got to trim that up pretty regularly. I don't respond well to the electric razor. They put tiny little nicks in my neck that make me itch, and they're uncomfortable. I probably just never got over the hump. I needed to try it longer, and I didn't. So I've been using these things, and I was going through the blades fast, like way too fast, like maybe one a week, which is very expensive.
You need like a weed eater.
Yeah, well, then I went on Clark Howard's website somehow, and he has a secret on there about making the blades last longer. The reasons our blades dull is not mostly from the shaving. It's from the micro rust that happens on the edge of the blade when you put it away wet. So you have to dry those razor blades off really, really well, and then
Nice.
they will last. I just threw one away this morning, and I bet you I had it pretty close to a year on there.
No way.
Yeah, the Gillette Mach 5.
Wow.
Little
Josh, we're
things.
only going to have to buy like one.
I know.
For your whole
baby.
life.
Let's go.
Right. It's a lifetime investment. So there you go. Try drying off your razor thoroughly and see what happens. By the way, if you use a straight razor, we'd love to hear from you because you're that cool. Today we are going to be talking with our special guest. This is Pastor Brad Gray. Brad is the senior pastor of Stonington Baptist Church in Paxinos, Pennsylvania. So I've said this to you before.
Yeah.
Everything about you, everything named in your life is cool. Stonington. That is a great name.
That's a pretty cool name.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Paxinos.
Yeah.
That's an awesome name. Brad Gray. Like you could that you don't need a stage name. You were born with one. Yeah, and then your family's names are pretty cool too. So Brad lives here in Pennsylvania, where he lives and serves with his wife Natalie, daughters Lydia and Bailey, and son Braxton. He's currently pursuing his MDiv at Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. Are you doing it as slowly as I am?
Very.
Okay.
I've been off for like a year and a half.
Okay, yeah. We are in the same boat, my brother.
So if I just took like one class, could I put
Then you're
that in
like,
my bio too?
I'm pursuing my MDiv.
Yeah.
I got it.
Midwestern. That's how to do it. He blogs regularly at graceupongrace.net. He's publishing a book under the 1517 publisher and hosts a podcast called Ministry Minded.
Yeah.
And Brad, welcome, brother.
Hey, it's good to be here.
Thank you for joining us. You
Yeah.
even drove to the studio today.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I've wanted to come for a long time. So I think the last time we were just talking about this, that I was going to come and then, some sort of weird pandemic happened or
Yeah,
something.
it's a national
A little blip.
issue.
A little blip on the
International.
radar.
Right. Yeah. So, last time you were relegated to the digital format, but we're glad to have you here. Zoomed out.
Yeah, I'm really zoomed out.
So, Brad, you left sunny Florida for a church in a very rural part of Pennsylvania. Why?
Yeah. That's the $64,000 question,
Yes,
right?
Yes.
My short answer is the only crazy thing that would make me do something as crazy as that is the crazy God that we serve, who loves to do stuff that's kind of unexpected. So, yeah, I was serving in a church in South Florida at the time, and the door was sort of closing on that chapter, if you will. And I started applying to churches. I've shared this story a couple of times. I don't know if I've ever shared it like super publicly, but
Lay it on us. Yeah, it's
okay.
great.
So I was applying to churches in quote unquote safe places, which is just elsewhere in Florida or in my home state of South Carolina where my dad serves, or like home state adjacent states. So North Carolina and Georgia.
Warm stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And no church was responding to me or I guess seemed interested in me. I eventually applied to 6 churches in Pennsylvania. I was really meticulous. I was keeping like this giant spreadsheet of all these people I was contacting and whatnot. And come to find out, 5 out of 6 churches in Pennsylvania were like, hey, we want to bring you up to interview. Stonington was first, and I came up and candidated, and it was just, I can say it was pretty much like we fit like a glove, and I guess the rest is history. It's the short way of telling that story.
History or
Ooh, or Providence.
Ooh, good segue, Joe.
That is Joe's spiritual gift. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's been pretty surreal to kind of see that happen.
Yeah.
It happened organically and naturally, and it's been a joy to come to a place where, people ask me that all the time, like, why would you do that? And like, did you know people here, or like, did you have family? And no, I didn't know anyone from Adam. I didn't have any connections. But we came on a literal step of faith.
Yeah.
And it's been a joy serving the church. It's been a joy like connecting with you guys and other churches who I would say are legit doing kingdom work. And that's the joyous part about it.
It's really, I don't know if you realize how much of an answer to prayer you are to people like us, actually, because we're watching this fallout happen in the rural church where the rest of the world has moved on from rural.
Yeah.
The rural roots of the country are really a memory at this point. And
Yeah.
they're like Andy Griffith memory. Think about it nostalgically. But as we said in our intro, Christ's people are still here.
Yeah.
And his church should be thriving and multiplying and all of those things in rural places.
Yeah.
So to have somebody like you who clearly God plucked from another region and plopped here
yeah.
is such an encouragement to our soul. We see that God is still at work in ways that we couldn't manufacture.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to, I think, what you hope to get out of ministry. And we can go on a lot of different routes on that topic, I guess. But, like that, if you think a ministry is about your accomplishment or something like that, or having quote unquote success, I guess it goes back to also like, what do you define as success in ministry? Like, well, for me, it's defined not by like numerical success or anything like that. It's more just about faithfulness. Like, I'll tell the story real quick. Like, my grandfather, he was a Baptist pastor for 50 years. And at one point he was pastoring like 2 churches at the same time, you know, like way back in the heyday of fundamentalism, like in the rural South. And so he served in the churches for a long time, 50 years of his life. And I always go back to this. I actually said this at his funeral several years ago. But it's always stuck with me. Like, so there's this pastor. He served a ton of churches, and he's done a lot for the kingdom. But he doesn't have a statue. He doesn't have a building. He doesn't even have, like, a pew, like, named after him. But what he does have is a legacy of faith that I think transcends any sort of, like, structure or monument. And I think that is the legacy of pastoral success, more so than, like, hey, my church just did this thing or whatever. It's how are you passing along that sort of legacy to other disciples?
Yeah. Amen. That's so good. Sounds very familiar.
If you guys want to hear a little bit more about that, the last time we had Brad on, I combined your first and last name. That's actually what we talked about. I still remember you saying quiet faithfulness is my goal in my ministry.
Quiet faithfulness. Yeah, that's what I used. Yeah,
that's what we
right.
talked about. Why do we need more rural pastors? So see it in the archives. Okay, bye-bye.
Very good. Speaking of quiet, let's continue this podcast that puts our voices across the rural landscape. So, hey, we wanted to talk about a topic that you and I texted a little bit about.
Sure.
And when I first heard you mention it, I wasn't exactly sure where you were going with it. You mentioned the difference between a theology of glory and a theology of the cross. Can you tell us just a little bit about what you mean by that?
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to do my best on this, and I'll confess this is a Baptist talking about a Lutheran doctrine. So if some of my Lutheran buddies get offended that I mess it up, well, they'll just have to correct me.
Straight from the Lutheran horse's mouth, by the way. This came straight from Martin Luther.
Yeah, so this is really hailing from basically these are really big, not really big. They're just kind of somewhat esoteric theological terms that kind of sound like you're talking about something that's nonsensical. But actually, I think when you get into the nitty-gritty of them, they have a lot of like rubber meets the road applicability. So theology of glory versus theology of the cross comes from his Heidelberg Disputation, which is basically the theses that he wrote, Luther did, in defense of his 95 Theses. So, 1517 nails the paper to the door of Wittenberg. And then he's given a chance, so to speak, to recant or to explain, and he explains his theology through the Heidelberg Disputation in 1518, which, by the way, is a collection of 28 theses that I think are more important than the 95, even though the 95 get all the attention. But he actually gets into the more granular theology. And so later on in the Disputation, he says in thesis number 20, quote, "He deserves to be called a theologian who comprehends the visible and manifest things of God seen through suffering and the cross." That's what he means by theology of the cross. And he says in thesis number 21, quote, "A theology of glory calls evil good and good evil. A theology of the cross calls the thing what it actually is." Now that sounds, again, very esoteric and kind of like, what does that even mean? And
it could even sound wrong because when we think of glory, we're thinking about usually like the chief end of man or
that's
God's
right.
eternal purpose. So help us understand the distinction.
Yeah, sure. So a theology of glory, at least how I understand it, is almost like viewing things as if they're a means to the end. There's a theologian by the name of Gerhard Forde who talks about this in his sort of book, which goes and talks about the Heidelberg and the theology of the cross. And he says, quote, "A theology of glory operates on the assumption that what we need is optimistic encouragement and some flattery, some positive thinking, some support to build our self-esteem. Theologically speaking, it operates on the assumption that we are not seriously addicted to sin and that our improvement is both necessary and possible." So essentially what he's saying is that a theologian of glory will see whatever hurdle in your way as an obstacle to overcome to achieve your own glory. It's a self glory. It's, it's that Reformation idea of like we are all navel gazers. And so a theologian of glory will see events happening in the world as either an avenue to pursue further self-glory, an obstacle to overcome to achieve further self-glory. Whereas a theologian of the cross, as he says, will basically trust in, what I've kind of come to understand it, more in the providence of God in a particular situation as opposed to my own ability to overcome it. And like when Luther says in Thesis 21 that a theologian of glory calls evil good and good evil, this is essentially like, in my mind, what I immediately jump to is like the Oprah theology that says, your setback is just the greatest preparation for your comeback or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, they're actually, if you boil it down, they're calling an evil thing good because it's just prepping you for something that's actually good.
That's the no regrets model.
Yeah.
I look back at my life and I just go, no regrets. It's what got me where I am.
And I think that's you're kind of ignoring reality in some ways. And it's like, and this is where to me, where I see this most predominantly is like in the space between quote unquote Good Friday and Easter Sunday. Like, we're so quick to jump to Easter Sunday because of its accomplishment and the victory and the triumph, and rightly so. But like, I preach the Gospel of Mark, and what I found so profound in that particular gospel is that the disciples, number one, were kind of dense the whole time as to what God was doing. If you read them in a way, you can read them, and maybe this is reading the text, but you can read them as if they are theologians of glory in the sense that how does this further the kingdom of glory? Because what they're thinking of the kingdom of glory is what? Jesus on a stallion, or I should say the Messiah on a stallion coming and overthrowing the Roman government. That's a
and who
very...
gets to sit at his right hand?
Yeah, and his disciples. They are glorified in that sense.
Emmaus Road reveals that.
Exactly.
We thought this was going to be awesome.
We thought this was the guy.
Yeah, right, yeah.
And I think what a theologian of the cross would say, well, just sit in that sort of confusion. Because again, what did the disciples think was going on when they saw their Lord and Savior like crucified? They should have perhaps, known what was going to happen, because Jesus everywhere talks about the cross and resurrection in tandem. If you read the Gospel of Mark, I think from chapter 8 through the rest, he talks about it like 3 or 4 times, and every time he talks about the cross, he talks about resurrection. So it's not like he was, it was some like backdoor secret mystery. It was pretty blatant. But they missed it, or they just forgot it. And so when they're sitting there in the room, John 20, remember like John 20, they're in a room that's locked out of fear of the Jews, because what do they think? This is devastating. Not just devastating, they are doomed. And then Jesus comes into the room and is like, hey, touch my side, touch my hands, because I'm the risen Lord. And then that's when they see and know. And, which just to say that we're so quick to sometimes just go towards the victory part, that we don't understand what God is revealing to us through some of, we could say, the crucible of suffering, through some of the darkness. Like if you read the Psalms, I think that's where David was a lot, and not just David, but that's where a lot of the people in scriptures are a lot. They're in the doldrums, and it's not they want to be out of them, as every sufferer does. But I would say a theologian of the cross would faithfully understand that God is revealing himself in this, not just in victory, not just in triumph.
Yeah, that's, I'm thinking of a lot of different implications for a rural pastor and a rural congregation. But one thing that I think is really universal is we like to look for the reason in our suffering or our hurting or our trials and find an answer somewhere in this life. So for instance would be, my wife and I experienced a miscarriage, and there's a part of me that wants to say, okay, now that I've vocalized this, I've been able to connect with a bunch of other people. So part of the redemption of the miscarriage is the fact that now I've got a tool to speak to somebody else. That is truly a part of God's providence. However, I can't look at my trial and say, oh, now I understand it, because it gave me a platform to speak to other people that I didn't have before.
Exactly.
But that's what we hear all the time. and as Christians, we're really tempted to go there and say, "Oh, I suffered this way, but it's okay because I got this other opportunity as a result of it."
Yeah, and we're really quick to do that because we want to supply that. I mean, I don't mean to keep calling her out, but we want to supply that like Oprah applause to the end of our suffering.
You get a car,
Yeah.
and you get a car, which has
You get
nothing to do with what you're talking about. But
Well, you can make it apply because we're like,
it's good.
we imagine King Jesus to be like, you get a crown,
This is
and
true.
you get a crown.
Thank
and
you.
Get like, and I don't think that.
I just like saying that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like, I've done a lot of thinking about this. The idea of suffering always having a reason, and we could say ultimately it does. I think John 9 is a great example of that. John 9 is that passage where Jesus' disciples come up to that guy. I think he's lame from birth, and they're like, "Who sinned in order to make this happen?" And basically,
Why is this man born blind?
yeah. And he heals him and basically says, "This was to reveal my glory
Yeah.
in this." And it's
End of story.
specifically glory through suffering, not through the accomplishment of it, but through this man's suffering. There's glory revealed in it, which again goes back to how does God reveal Himself? Not through triumph, or else He would have had a sword and a stallion when He incarnated, not a stall filled with straw. He reveals Himself through being the lowest of the low on the social sort of rungs of early Jewish life. All of that to say that's how He reveals Himself. The theologian of the cross sees it. Jesus talks about it in John 9. But then going back to like suffering having a reason, how we view it. I always go back to the books of Job and Ecclesiastes, because if you view both of those, Job's never given a reason why his ordeal comes down. Like, we know what it is because we have Job chapters 1 and 2. Job is not aware that the adversary has made this really crazy wager with the Father that he can get Job to curse him if he just takes some things away. Job doesn't know that. Job just, all he sees is he's having, what's that kid's book, a very good, horrible, no bad day. That's what he sees. That's his vantage point. And so from the human vantage point, the ultimate, and I would say frustrating part, is that sometimes suffering doesn't have a reason. It doesn't have a really nice bow to put on it, where we can be like, and here it is, and here's why, here's why that happened with your family, here's why your friend passed away, or like, and that's sometimes can sound kind of glib, and I don't mean it to. It's just, I think it sounds, for me, it's been helpful to sound honest.
Well, what is it that transitions it from glib and defeatist to actually having value?
And this is where I go back to like what Paul talks about in Romans about having hope, because what is hope except for a message of we could say grace that comes to the hopeless? Like, if you aren't hopeless, what do you have to hope in? Hope only works when you're in a weary world, when you're in a world that is without light and truth, or seemingly so. And so what I would say then to those who think that it's, you can read Ecclesiastes and get a nihilistic viewpoint, like everything doesn't make sense. But I actually don't think that that's what he's arguing for, whoever you think the preacher is, Solomon or otherwise. What I think he's arguing for is just essentially that there's a sort of transcendent meaning that we aren't privy to. And so the best use of our time is to have dinner with our friends and family. Not try to make sense of our times, not try to change our times, but to live within our times, knowing that this time is a gift from God. And yes, that's even true even of suffering. It's a gift in which we are given the ability to recognize what Jesus went through as the man of sorrows, or number two, it's a gift given to us to recognize how God reveals Himself in our lives or in the lives of others through the manifestation of suffering.
which also glorifies him through the shaping of us into his image through the process as well.
Oh, yeah.
Which is so critical.
Oh, yeah. Because, Peter talks about that in 1 Peter 1, right? Like, this is, God the Father putting you through the furnace, and you're coming out as gold. But I would argue that he's not talking about, our refinement in the here and now necessarily. Maybe he is, and maybe you'll come out of this season of suffering better for it. Maybe, actually, I think what Peter's talking about there is at the last day, which is just to say a lot of the triumph of suffering that we know about and talk about is not always realized in the here and now. It's always a future-looking hope, which is, again, what we cling to when we're in suffering, that even when it doesn't look like it, there is a work of God being worked. There is a providential power that's being displayed, even when it doesn't look like that.
Which arguably still stops short if it only lands on us, like we'll be delivered in the last day.
Yeah.
Because it's not even just that. It's that God has these little statues of Christ in us, made in God's image, but then redeemed and bought that we might really demonstrate the radiance of Christ. We're being shaped into his image so that at the end of all, life on earth in this form, I'm like going to trip myself up with my all my qualifications so that I don't totally botch the end times. But when this time ceases, what the fruit will not be like, phew, I made it. I had this faith that is more valuable than gold. God refined me. Like, that's all awesome and good.
Yeah.
And we benefit from that dearly. But in the end, what it does is the thing God created the earth to do and everything in it, it brings him glory.
Yeah.
Because now here is this thing fully formed into the image of Christ so that when you see it, you're like, wow, Jesus is awesome.
Yeah.
So that's the ultimate end of all of it, which
Exactly.
is huge. Which, as I listen to you and hear you talk about the theology of the cross, that seems to be what you're saying.
Yeah, I would say so. It sees like he's the ultimate purpose of all of this. What he's doing with this world individually, corporately, if you will, cosmically, if you will. He's the ultimate end and purpose of all of this, and sometimes it's not seen that way. Like, if you want to, maybe you're tired of talking about this, but like, how quick were we to sort of try and rationalize or sort of contextualize the COVID-19 pandemic? Like, that to me is a way in which we're trying to understand what God is doing through a time in our history that we don't always have all the ingredients of. You know that old saying, hindsight is 20/20. Yes, hindsight for the Christian is God's providence. Like, you look back, and what you see as abject despair when you look back on it can actually be, threads of providence that you weren't aware of before. I think we have no idea why the world went through that, and maybe we're still in it. I don't know, because it depends on how you define it.
No, you blew on it and it went away.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
COVID-19's over. Yeah. Remember?
Yeah, that's right.
The video you released of yourself?
Oh my gosh, that was not me.
Oh, who was it, Josh?
Kenneth.
Oh,
Our friend, Mr. Copeland.
Oh, yes, there you go. I
Yes.
thought you were going to do an impression, maybe.
COVID-19. I blow. The wind of
Well
God. You got to get the eyes. It's all in the eyes.
Yeah,
Good
you have to
job.
get the eyes and the finger that he wags.
Yeah.
At COVID. No, but like, I've thought about a lot about this too. Like, to me, like, I think a proper theologian might take it in a different direction, but like theologian of glory and theologian of cross, for me, I see most predominantly through providence, and I know we were talking about this earlier, but like, just seeing the way God moves through history, there's a way in which you can see everything. Like, how many times have people, and maybe I don't mean to call you out on this, but like, how many people in your church have asked you, like, where on the end times are we right now? Like,
Yeah.
like a lot.
It's a super common question.
It's
yeah.
a really common question,
Mhm.
because what are we trying to do? We're trying to understand something that I don't always know, or I don't always believe that we're able to understand in the moment. It's only like way afterwards that we'll understand what are all the after effects of what this is
But-
and providence and everything.
We want to find the temporal meaning in
Yeah.
eternal things.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
So,
Go ahead.
how do we work this into our ministry in a rural context? How do we preach this? How do we disciple through this? How do we lead small groups with this understanding?
Yeah.
How do we counsel through this of a mother coming to us with a terrible situation in tears?
Well, I think, like for me as a pastor, this like brings me to that reality that perhaps we don't always want to admit, but we have to. That number one, we may not have the answers for everything, and I think that that's a hard thing to sometimes admit when you're counseling someone. And number one, maybe they really want an answer, and I think that's the frustrating part is
They sure do.
I don't always have one to give, and that's a hard and I would say humbling thing to admit. But also number two, I think one of the best ways you can see this is what the early church does with the cross in Acts. Like from a practical standpoint, what they do is they tie providence and evil in the same breath. Like Peter's talking about how the wicked men crucified Jesus and how awful it was. And then in the same breath, he says, this was according to the predeterminate foreknowledge of God, which is holding both things at once. It's holding the pain of the suffering that has just occurred, that he and all of his friends has just endured, along with the providence of God working through it, which is just to say that for like a counseling and discipleship situation, you're leaning into the tension that I think is, I would say, normative of the Christian life. The tension of the already and the not yet. It's the tension of having faith in a God who has created and made all things, but also yet is in all things, and we don't always know what he's doing. I think sometimes that tension is one we want to stray away from, and then we get into like Job's friends, where we're trying to explain why everything has happened through rational logic or something like that.
Yeah, and I think it's important just to be reminded that there are numerous biblical principles that we can apply
Yeah.
that will help us understand how to think about things, but won't necessarily solve the things.
Yeah.
So that's a really important thing for us to help with as pastors is, we were talking earlier about, in a rural setting, a lot of vocations are built upon hard work, and that's how you survive. And in rural communities, that's why a lot of them are still standing when they shouldn't be, because there's hard, dedicated workers there who've given their life over to this thing. So one of the things I think we need to consider in our churches is, we're a people who are programmed in the rural setting to look at A plus B and say it's going to equal C every time.
Yeah.
And when it doesn't, theologically, that can be really confusing and frustrating and hard to work through. And even like sometimes I think when we preach, you could get an amen on the like God values hard work. I'm sure that there are folks who would probably amen if I said God helps those who help themselves.
Yeah.
We just know from polls that most Christians think that's in the Bible. So looking at this and going, you know what, I may not have the answer to why A plus B turned out to be F, but I can tell you that as Christians, here's how we need to think about it, and helping us get tied back into that bigger picture of what God is doing, which is way more valuable than going, you know what, I think your son died because of this. I think you got cancer because of this.
Yeah.
Instead going, you know what, God has a broader purpose than what you can even see, and he's calling you right now to trust in him and to bring him glory through the way you think and live.
Oh,
In
totally.
the midst of all of that. I think that's a really important way for us to shepherd our congregations.
Oh, yeah.
And this is a little bit of maybe a soapbox of mine, but the things we sing about in church, that's one of the things that will matter with this. So I was in the dentist the other day, and I don't normally have a problem with the dentist at all. I go and I get the stuff done and I go home. Well, they had my mouth held open with all kinds of accoutrements for an hour and 45 minutes. And I started to like panic, like I felt really claustrophobic. And in that moment, it wasn't profound, but in my heart, I'm like quoting scripture so I don't freak out. Like, have you ever had that moment where it's like, I have to stand up and throw everything on my face off my face right now, or I'm in trouble. And I actually, in God's kindness, had a picture of our congregation singing songs that I've seen them sing a million times about things that actually matter, like Christ, our hope in life and death. So, I felt my heart rate actually slow down and calm as I'm picturing the things we sing. So the way you preach is one thing, but the songs that you encourage your congregation to sing, that really will impact those moments when it's like, I don't understand this suffering, this trial, this hardship, this temptation, but I do have in my mind a quick framework for how I should think about it.
Yeah.
So like the song Christ, our hope in life and death totally reorients you to eternal things.
Yes.
And the purpose that God has in all of them. Another song, Christ is mine forevermore. It's like all of this life is passing away. Every verse has this tension of negative things about this life.
Yeah.
And then it's resolved not with here's why the negative things happened, but the fact that despite them, you have Christ.
Yeah.
And that's enough. And we need that. That's really important.
From singing too to like preaching, like this goes into like how you present a book of history. Like, going to the Old Testament, how does this, guy, what are the moral lessons from such and such? Like, isn't that like the predominant view of what the Old Testament is or does? I mean, and maybe that's a generalization, but most often we're like, let's go to the New Testament to learn about grace, and let's go to the Old Testament to learn about how to be more moral.
Don't be like Jonah.
Don't
Run
be like
from
Jonah.
God.
Yeah.
Yeah. That kind of stuff. It totally divorces the situation from
1,000%.
the overall theology.
And yet, however, if you think of Scripture not as a moralistic handbook, but as a divinely inspired revelation of how God works through history, through every single time, then can I just steal Tolkien here? Like, then we don't have to like worry about, why did this have to happen in our time? And you can be like Gandalf and just say, that's not for us to decide. All that's for us to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us, i.e. faithfulness. And like, when you read like the books of history from the standpoint of God revealing himself through the abject horror of history, then it makes you realize that COVID-19 isn't a blip on the radar. It's sort of like normative to the human condition, which is just to say that God has always been working through abject sorrow and suffering. And which is, maybe that's shocking, but I think it's also one thing that we can say he's always been a God who fulfills his promises through every single age of human history. He's been doing that, and he hasn't stopped, and he probably won't. And to me, like what I've been encouraging my folks is just to, again, kind of like Luther says in his commentary on Psalms, is to sort of hope beyond hope in this hidden providence of God that works even when it doesn't look like it, even when it doesn't feel like it. Like, it's still working. It's still moving. He's still shaping and acting in our world. And we want to see it through, like, the triumphs of revivalism or the triumphs of such and such sort of movement. But sometimes it works through a lot more smaller and a lot more hidden and a lot more sort of like sort of behind the scenes sorts of ways that you can only see in terms of faithfulness. You can only see in terms of in terms of hindsight sometimes.
It's good. Well, brothers, we should shift gears here a little bit.
Yeah.
We have quite a bit here under our belt already, and I could talk about this for another couple hours. We actually have been talking about it most of the morning already, which has been really good. But we want to be faithful with the time here. So, Brad, is there anything else that we should bring up on this topic that we have not covered?
No, I would just, like, if you're talking specifically about Theologian of Glory versus Theologian of the Cross, there's a couple books out there. Gerhard Forde is one. Whatever your views are on, like, some of his stuff, I think that book is very helpful in terms of understanding what a theology of the cross is. And what it does and why Luther wrote it. Of course, the best probably way is just to read Luther himself. Read the Heidelberg. Read. I would say you can find it on Google Books, which is kind of nice. Luther's commentary on Psalms 1 through 22, and especially Psalms 3 and 4. He leans into this idea on a number of occasions, and I found that very, very helpful. In terms of like providence, I cannot highly recommend enough Dale Ralph Davis's commentaries on 1st and 2nd Kings. It's very applicable to me. I'm preaching through 1st and 2nd Kings, but Dale Ralph Davis is this Old Testament theologian who has such a handle on Scripture, and also in a way of bringing it really down to earth. And what drives Davis's sort of theology and the way he understands some of those more frustrating Old Testament books is just the way in which it shows how God works through agony and through frustration and stuff like that. So his books on Kings, but he has also ones on 1st and 2nd Samuel and Joshua and Judges too. His books are awesome on that.
I think when we preached through Judges, we used his little blue book, Dale Ralph Davis's.
Yeah, I forget what it's called, but it's on Judges. It's by Christian Focus. It's a
Focus on the Bible series. I
yeah,
think.
it's a great series of commentaries.
Awesome. Joe, was there anything else you wanted to cover that we didn't get to?
There was a lot that was covered, and there was a ton to talk about. Like, we could talk about this for hours and hours and hours.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe we'll have to have him back on, because I've got lots of stuff.
Part 2.
Would he be our first 3-time guest?
Yes.
Oh, you would replace Denny Dillman.
I'll be glad to. There's a lot that we could.
There was just even more like on-point practical sorts of things, and just as situationally, because in one way we're talking at a deeper theological level, and it's probably for some folks who are listening out there right now, they're having a hard enough time putting this into their brains because it doesn't naturally fit. Right? It just doesn't.
It grates against a lot of it. Yeah.
It really does, and it is a deep and real and special and powerful, and points us to the cross. And so, ways that we would be able to use this.
Yeah.
And
Well,
even in examples. Because, I mean, we just covered just like one example just very, very briefly. But I think that this could be I don't know, all I can think of right now is like a paradigm sort of shifting thing for some guys that are out there.
Well, I mean, not to like, I don't want to like add more pressure to myself, but I'm trying to work through some of this in my book, so hopefully that'll help. But I would also say that like I agree with you, like it grates against our natural inclinations for how the world works, so to speak.
Right.
And in that way, I think that puts us in a great spot, because that's exactly what the disciples were working through when they were walking around with Jesus. Jesus was constantly telling them things that grated against the way they naturally viewed how things worked. And so if we can read the Bible in a way that we align ourselves with the disciples and their frustration, I actually think that's going to put us in a great spot, because we can come to that same cathartic moment that they all did, where Luke 24, again, one of my favorite passages, the amazed disciples, they're like, we thought this was the guy. And then Jesus is telling them, oh, yeah, I am the guy. It's not as what you thought. And then he goes and has dinner with all the disciples at the end. And he tells them how, all of the law and the prophets and the poetry and everything was concerning me. And like from that point on, you turn the page to Acts chapter 1, and the same guys who were like fleeing Jesus, fleeing his side a couple of days ago are now, as it says in Acts 17, they're turning the world upside down. Mm-hmm. The only thing that's changed is the resurrection, which is just to say that like it's okay to be sometimes frustrated with the way Jesus presents his truths, because it does grate against our human nature, and that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Excellent. Hey, if people want to find out more about you, Brad, where do they go?
You can find out about my church, StoningtonBaptist.com. Or .org, or you can find about my blog, graceupongrace.net. I do a lot of writing over there. I'm on a couple of other sites too, but they're all linked there. That's really what I mostly do nowadays. I just like to write. So,
tell us when we can expect to see your book.
Hopefully at the end of this year. So it'll be in the editing process in a couple of weeks. So depending on how long that takes. So I guess, if I can do a good enough first draft.
Nice.
We'll see how that goes.
That's another topic we should have you on a fourth time for, is what it looks like to be a pastor who's also a writer. be it.
Yeah. Oh, I would have a lot to say there.
There we go. So put that in your pipe
2
and
episodes in
smoke
the
it.
bank.
There we go. Very good. And then we have to update on our 2 questions we ask everybody, even though we've asked them to you before.
Okay.
Are
and
there any changes? Is what we're
there
looking
may be
for.
changes.
Okay.
There may be changes. So, Joe, you want to go first?
What's your favorite ice cream now?
My favorite ice cream now.
Josh,
So
do you remember what he said last time?
you don't remember? I mean, my pat answer is chocolate Moose Tracks, but
That might have been it.
I think it might have been it.
It sounds familiar.
It sounds-
that in,
there's-
in his voice, chocolate mousse trap.
There's one at Boyer's. So, I didn't have a Boyer's where I was before, but now Boyer's has like Turkey Hill ice cream, I guess
Oh.
it is. And there's one in there that's like chocolate marshmallow swirl. That's really good. I really like that one.
Turkey Hill knows how to do the marshmallow correctly.
Yeah, they do. I'm a big fan of like those places where you get like the what do you call it? Like the frozen yogurt.
Oh, yeah.
And you're not supposed to add marshmallow because that makes your bowl heavier,
Yeah,
right?
right.
And like that makes you pay more. But
Can't
I'm always
resist.
the dude that's like, I'm just gonna put a buttload of marshmallow in it because I like it a lot.
Well done. Yeah, it's good. I like that as well. Awesome. That's a great pick. And then on a much more serious note,
Sure.
your favorite hymn
Oh.
or Hillsong song?
Can I use that? I can't use Hillsong.
Well,
Okay.
yes, it is cancel culture.
Oh man, I was gonna say "Oh Praise the Name," but
Oh, that is a
Um,
good one. That's really hard to argue with.
we just introduced it to our church, so
Oh, nice.
I would actually probably say, oh man, it's one by City of Light.
That's softer, gentler Hillsong.
Oh, it's I am literally blanking on the name. It's
Say
like
some lyrics.
I was
um,
waiting.
Yet
Brad
not I,
might
but
be
through Christ
the
in
very
me.
first person that blanks on a name.
it was on one.
Because I would certainly blank too.
I'm like blanking on everything. Hold on one
That's
second.
okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of the test to see how spiritual you are.
Yeah,
if you
I'm
can
not-
remember the title of City of Light songs, you are truly spiritual.
Oh man, only a holy God.
Ooh,
That's a
that's
good
a
one.
good
Yeah.
one. Yeah.
That's a really good one that I like.
Trevor introduced that to our congregation.
Oh, man, it's so good.
Yep.
It's a great song.
Yeah, totally agreed. Awesome. Well, that's great. Hey, thanks again for being here.
Oh,
we
yeah.
really appreciate it. But
Pleasure.
we're not done with you yet
Okay.
because we're going to invite you to Stuff
Rule.
Pastors
Can't use.
Reviews. And hopefully you know what you're reviewing.
Not yet.
Okay.
So you go first.
Oh.
Joe has something to review. And it is something that slings.
Yes, it is. So I had to retire my backpack that I had that backpack for like 4 or 5 years. It was the backpack that I carried my Chromebook back and forth to work at when I was pastor at GFF. And so when I did, I made the transition from my previous church to this church. I had to make a couple other transitions because, again, I post up wherever is available in my not office, which is really cool. I love it. But I'm taking things back and forth from home to work, and so I wanted to upgrade my backpack game because I also was forcefully converted to use a MacBook as well. And so
Semi-forcefully.
Joe, I told you I wasn't gonna reveal your secret, but TJ, we were sitting and working together the other day, and Joe said, "Don't tell TJ, but I love this stupid."
Oh.
That's what I said. Don't tell him, but man, I
Nice.
love this.
Nice.
that was
So,
the appropriate time.
That
Yeah.
was.
So I upgraded. I went from a backpack to a sling bag.
You have it with you, yeah?
It's in my
Oh,
office. It's in
nuts.
my office, not office. It is made by Condor.
I'll
which-
bet Trevor can get it in 2 shakes.
Sprint.
Yep.
All right, yeah. So
Thank you, Trevor. Only because you're not wearing headphones.
And I have this inclination to be like a Boy Scout, and I will throw everything in my backpack so that I'm prepared for absolutely every emergency and contingency situation.
Mm-hmm.
But this Condor sling pack limits my ability to do that. It is very svelte, which is an adjective that does not necessarily go with me all the time, right? So, but it's pretty small, and as a sling pack, it only has one strap around the side, so I can put my MacBook, my iPad, a medium-sized Bible, and then all my pens, highlighters, cables, and
What-
assorted other things.
What about your knife sharpener and 3 extra magazines?
I can fit a couple extra magazines in there, but not the knife sharpener. It
Oh.
all depends on what you put in the secret compartment.
Okay.
Because not only is this regular old dude go to the office backpack, but there is a special secret zipper
right.
right here.
Mm-hmm.
And you can stash
Put your lunch in there.
your lunch in there if it's a thin sandwich or
That's right.
your CCW.
There you go. Yeah, and did I see Molly webbing on the hip?
There is a little bit of Molly there on the hip. You can throw yourself a first aid pack on there if you
Modular.
want to.
I like it.
Yeah, so you can add all sorts of different things. Made out of Cordura nylon, super strong, zippy zippers. It looks pretty sharp.
Yeah, I like
I
it.
dig it.
Very good.
So
Brad?
that was the Condor.
The Condor.
Sector sling bag.
Very good. Thank you. Did you come up with something, brother?
Yeah. Hopefully this will be useful. So it's sort of like two, but in one. I don't know. Like for me, I would much prefer to have a physical book in my hand. I would much rather be able to flip pages and read and stuff like that. It helps me in the way I think. So, but perhaps like you don't have access to a lot of that. I would just say if you haven't yet, make use of archive.org. Archive.org is like the internet archive. You can literally look up like old versions of like blogs and websites on there. So if there's like a blog from 2009 that you can't find anymore, you can look it up via their Wayback Machine. But also on here is
Okay, let me give it time out. The Wayback Machine, if you ever accidentally dump your entire church website and
Yeah.
you need to know
There
exactly
you go.
what you had before, go to the Wayback Machine, put in your URL, and you got it.
yeah,
It's all
it
right there.
crawls over the web, and it like gets, I don't know all the fancy things. It just takes
Take snapshots.
snapshots. It copies some of those old ways the websites used to look and work and stuff like that. So you can read old articles, all that stuff. But part of that, you can read a lot of like out of copyright commentaries. This is also true for Google Books. I don't know if you've ever made use of Google Books. There is a slew of amazing commentaries. Like you can read a lot of Calvin's, of course, and like I know that they're like linked on other blogs and stuff like that, but you can download them all in PDF, so you can always access them on your iPad or stuff. So you can put the PDFs in Apple Books, so then you can always have them wherever you go, and you can read PDFs on your iPad. So then you can have all of a commentary on such and such a book always with you, and you didn't have to pay for it because it's out of copyright. You can download it for free. So archive.org, I use it all the time for some of the stuff that I'm researching or studying, or Google Books too. You can do a lot of searching on there. And there's some really great stuff you can find.
Including the old Wellsboro Bible Church website.
Look at that.
When it was Independent Bible Church. The clouds are moving in the background. I'm not sure if you can tell. And
That is a very early
Yeah.
2000s website.
it is very much so. Very much so. Well, thank you. Those are really helpful recommendations. But there's a little bit of a problem.
Oh no.
Brad's in trouble.
We must help him.
We must help him. Josh, how can we help Brad?
Well, you could help us with our SOS and help Brad with his SOS. I don't know what his is, but ours is share, offer a review, and subscribe. Subscribe is the first S, sorry. Subscribe, offer a review, and share. That's our SOS.
If you would do that, guys, it's a blessing. So if this
Amen.
It doesn't really matter which order you subscribe
doesn't.
or share in.
Nope.
But you'll be fine.
Yep.
if this podcast has been a blessing to you in any way, we would ask you to just take a second and share the love a little bit so that we can continue to connect with other rural pastors. Just a really important community that we have, and this fellowship and brotherhood we share, I think, I know it's been a blessing to my soul, and it just serves for the advancement of Christ's kingdom in rural places.
Mm-hmm.
So please help us out that way. And Josh,
Yo.
quote us out.
I have chosen the second one. So this is from Luther's Larger Catechism from 1529. There was no counsel, no help, no comfort for us until this only and eternal Son of God, in his unfathomable goodness, had mercy on our misery and wretchedness and came from heaven to help us. Jesus Christ, the Lord of life and righteousness and every good and blessing. He has snatched us, poor lost creatures, from the jaws of hell, won us, made us free, and restored us to the Father's favor and grace. He who has brought us back from the devil to God, from death to life, from sin to righteousness, and now keeps us safe there.
Amen. Awesome. Well done. Well, brothers, thanks. It's been a joy,
Mm-hmm.
and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
See ya.
Raise your Ebenezer.
Thank you for joining us for another edition of Rural Pastors Talk, a podcast highlighting the advancement of Christ's kingdom in rural places, just like the town you live in. Hey, Josh.
Hello.
If people want to learn more, what do they do?
Well, they can email us at ruralpastorstalk@gmail.com. They can find us on Facebook, or you can tweet at us at ruralpastors.
Ta-ta.